This segment is brought to you by Terrebonne Ford, built Ford tough. All right, we are back with the First Lieutenant of the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Department, Blake Tabor. Good to see you, First Lieutenant. How are you today?
Good to see you. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Martin.
Oh, what a horrific story. And I know the family well. Of course, we all knew Judge Cleve Marcel, and I went to school with Gina Marcel. But when I heard this, I'm like, God, once again, this don't happen in Terrebonne Parish, but it did.
Yep. And look, you know, we talk about this all the time. There's no Mayberry anymore, right? I mean, these things are happening, and just the level of violence associated with this particular investigation is just, it's something that we talk about, you know, shocking the conscience. And, you know, this is exactly one of those. So, you know, we responded on July 22nd, shortly before 9 p.m. when we learned of a home in Schriever where a male suspect had entered the home armed with a hammer and began attacking two residents inside that home. So, of course, you know, we talk about it a lot. This isn't something that we get all the time. So this is clearly a very dangerous situation. So again, our patrol division sprung into action, and they were there very, very quickly. Once they arrived on scene, they actually came into contact with several neighbors who were holding what we learned to be a suspect at gunpoint who was in the home. Of course, when we arrived there, you know, first order of business is to make sure that we're disarming everyone, because as an officer approaching, you'd never know what the situation is. So again, everyone was disarmed, and we quickly learned that the male suspect that was basically in custody by the neighbors was identified as a Brian Joseph Guillotte. You see him photographed here. When our deputies arrived, obviously they came and encountered a very bloody, gruesome scene where they quickly found two male victims. One was an elderly male who appeared to be suffering from some pretty serious bodily injury, obvious signs of trauma from the hammer, was incoherent, unable to speak to us and provide us any details. There was a second male there that was able to provide some pretty serious details about what happened. We quickly learned that as the elderly male answered the door, again, we're talking about 9 o'clock at night, you know, pretty strange for someone to be arriving at your house unannounced at that time. Once he opened the door, suspect Guillotte forced his way into the home and immediately began to strike him with a hammer. The second victim was a family member of the first victim. As he came to the first victim's aid, of course, he began to be beaten by Guillotte as well. Ultimately, the neighbors could hear the screams, which I understand was probably some blood-curdling screams, enough to be able to be heard next door. Right. They immediately ran to his defense where they had weapons on their person. And again, they took Guillotte into custody, thankfully so. Ultimately, our detectives from Violent Crimes Division were called into the scene. As they began to interview the victim, they began to substantiate a lot of evidence that they were able to see at the scene that, again, corroborated exactly what the victims and the witnesses were saying. So ultimately, Brian Guillotte was taken into custody, but he was ultimately transferred to a medical facility where he was suffering from some medical issues unrelated to the attack. And he was placed in that hospital for several days where, again, we watched him. He was under police care and custody. And later he was released and taken to our facility where he was placed under arrest for 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder and 1 count of home invasion. And I'm glad to say that he is there on a no bond by local judges. Now let's rewind back to the victims. The original victim was taken to an out-of-area hospital where they were taken by helicopter due to the severity of the injuries and remained in ICU for several days. And ultimately, that second victim was flown to an out-of-area hospital as well. It's my understanding that the second victim was released prior to the first, but both are recovering at home now, as I understand it.
Yeah, we wish the whole family our best, and certainly a very tough circumstance. And thank you for bringing us that. But, you know, let's just pray that their health
absolutely
gets back in store.
It's tough to see and tough to deal with, you know.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
They have a long road ahead of them.
Yes, indeed. Let's talk, if we can. Let's switch to navigating Louisiana's new hands-free law. Can you give us a little information on that?
Yeah, so this one, as you could about imagine, has garnered a lot of interest on social media, not just with us. I believe that state police is probably fielding a lot of information about this one as well. So starting on August 1st, a new law is going to go into effect where drivers are unable or not allowed to hold a device in their hand whatsoever while they are in the operation of a motor vehicle. There is some information where people are asking, well, what about if I'm at a red light? Can I check my phone? Can I send an email? Some of those things will be permitted as long as the vehicle is not in motion. Mm-hmm. The minute that vehicle is in motion, no text messages, no emails, completely hands-free. So until January 1st of 2026, when this does take effect, it's going to be basically verbal warnings given. And you'll see a lot of things that are going to happen. So again, with this trend, you're going to see a lot of enforcement of this particular law from now until January 1st.
Well, let's do this. We'll bring you on next time you come on and talk a little more in depth about this. 'Cause
Absolutely.
this is interesting. But hey, I'm all for it. I'm guilty as charged sometimes in the car, but it's a good rule to get everybody safe.
And look, we all are. And there's some times where, in the state of emergency, they'll be allowed to call 911. So it's not as black and white as it may seem.
All right. Thank you for that. All right. We'll take a break. We'll be back. We'll have some more of this next week. This segment was brought to you by Terrebonne Ford. Built Ford Tough.